Imagine this. You're standing alone in a vast white room. No doors, no windows, no clocks. The silence is so absolute that you can hear the blood coursing in your ears. There's no one to watch, no task to perform, no purpose to fulfill. Just you and a gnawing realization crawling through your spine. Nothing here means anything. Now stretch that room into a life. Wake up, go to work, scroll through endless feeds, smile at people you don't know, laugh at things you don't find funny, chase goals you can't even explain. You tell yourself it matters, you have to, but something inside you whispers otherwise. When the noise fades and the distractions die down, when the facade slips even slightly, there it is again. The sickening thud of a question you can't unhear. What if none of this matters? The promotions, the parties, the people, the heartbreaks and triumphs, the philosophies and prayers, the art and the war and the stars. What if it's all just random flickers in a blind universe? What if you're not a soul on a journey, but a pattern of atoms dancing briefly before disintegration? You try to shake the thought. You tell yourself you're just tired or stressed or need a hobby. You think of your childhood dreams, your family, your future. But the question doesn't go away. It lingers beneath your daily tasks, like a faint but persistent static. What is this all for? You aren't alone in this. It's the quiet horror of modern existence, buried beneath the metrics, the mindfulness apps, the motivational quotes taped to the fridge. Beneath every social media post asking, "How's everyone doing today?" is the unspoken scream, "Do I even matter?" Maybe you've asked yourself this before, but quickly turned away. Maybe you felt it at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling with your phone dark beside you, realizing there's nothing left to scroll. Maybe you've felt it not during pain, but after joy, when the laughter dies down and you're left with the eerie question, was that it? This is the paradox. You are surrounded by more stimulation, more freedom, more choices than any generation before you, and yet a growing number of people feel hollowed out, like mannequins dressed in curated identities. You can travel the world, connect with thousands, build entire digital realities, and still there's a yawning absence inside you, like a locked room you're too afraid to open. You might think this feeling is rare, an occasional existential crisis. But what if it's not an error? What if it's a symptom, a signal? What if this sense of meaninglessness is not a crack in the system, but the system working exactly as it was designed? Think of it. A world where progress means acceleration, but not direction. Where we are told we can be anything but never taught why. Where worth is measured in clicks, likes, and conversions. Where death is sanitized and truth is fragmented. Where distraction is constant and depth is obsolete. How do you anchor yourself in a sea without a shore? You might try religion, therapy, ambition, even rebellion, but each offers only temporary relief if the foundation underneath remains untouched. And still, the great question hums beneath it all, like a background frequency you can't quite shut off. What is the point of a life lived in a world that doesn't care you exist? Does meaning exist objectively outside of you? Or is it a hallucination we cling to in order to stay sane? And if it is a hallucination, does that mean we are better off without it? Or doomed without it? What if meaning is not something you find, but something you fabricate? And if that's true, then what stops you from falling into complete nihilism? From admitting that it's all a cosmic joke without a punchline? You're not just asking philosophical questions anymore. You're confronting the very architecture of your identity. If you accept that the world has no built-in meaning, how do you wake up tomorrow and move with purpose? And if you reject that possibility, are you just lying to yourself for the sake of comfort? These are not abstract ideas. These are the silent wars waged in the hearts of people every day, the ones who smile in public and drown in private, the ones who succeed by every metric but still feel an aching emptiness, the ones who wonder silently, is this really all there is? The unsettling truth, most people live their entire lives avoiding this question. They fill the void with noise, routine, consumption. But sooner or later, the silence finds them. And in that silence, the question waits like a patient ghost. So what now? Do you ignore the question and go back to the illusion? Or do you dive headfirst into the void, hoping to emerge with something deeper than belief, something unshakable? If you dare to ask, really ask, if you let the silence in, then you're ready for the next step. Because the feeling of meaninglessness might not be the end. It might be the beginning. You felt the silence. You heard the question. Now let's step closer to the edge. Why does this crisis of meaning haunt us so profoundly, so universally? Why does a human being capable of reason, invention, and empathy still wake up feeling hollow in a world bursting with information and possibility? The answer is not simply that life is meaningless. The deeper truth, the one we seldom utter aloud, is that we were not built for a world without gods, without myths, without cohesive stories. Our biology, our psychology, our very bones were carved in a different kind of world, one of cycles, tribes, totems, and sacred signs, a world where death had purpose, suffering had shape, and identity was not an algorithmic selection of traits, but a ritual inheritance. But we killed our gods. Nietzsche warned of this with almost prophetic dread. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. This wasn't a celebration, it was a funeral. The divine scaffolding that once held up civilization had been pulled away, and in its absence a void opened up, silent, black, bottomless. And what rushed in to fill that void? Not truth, not freedom, but confusion, relativism, anxiety. Because even if you claim you don't need religion or spiritual myths, your psyche does. Not necessarily the dogma or doctrine, but the structure, the archetypes, the narrative coherence, something to orient you, an axis mundi around which to spin your life. When that breaks, we're like compasses demagnetized. We spin and spin but point nowhere. Carl Jung, the great architect of the inner world, saw this rupture clearly. He wrote, "The modern man is a godless wanderer who no longer knows where he belongs." The collective unconscious, the deep storehouse of symbols and instincts we all share, still longs for meaning, still generates myths, but we've trained ourselves to reject them. We've replaced dreams with diagnostics, symbols with symptoms, rituals with routines. That's the hidden problem. You live in a world where the external form of life has evolved faster than the internal architecture of your mind. You're still a creature of story, of sacred patterns, of the need to belong to something larger than yourself. Yet you've been thrown into a postmodern abyss where every truth can be deconstructed and every purpose called a projection. It's not just disorienting, it's psychologically dismembering. Consider Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist who faced the purest form of nihilism in Nazi death camps. He observed that those who lost their sense of purpose, not just food or shelter, died faster. The body withers when the soul finds no reason to endure. Meaning is not a luxury, It is oxygen for the human spirit. Yet our culture mocks the search for meaning as naive. Instead, it gives you choices. You can be anything, do anything, live your truth. But beneath that promise lies a paralyzing ambiguity. If you can be anything, who are you really? Jean-Paul Sartre described this freedom as both gift and curse. Without divine templates or eternal truths, you are condemned to be free. You must choose, invent, construct your meaning. There is no script, only improvisation. But how many are truly equipped for that level of existential responsibility? So we retreat. We retreat into what Schopenhauer called the will to life, the blind instinct to survive and seek pleasure. We distract ourselves with consumption, reproduction, reputation, but all the while the deeper yearning remains unfulfilled. The yearning to feel anchored, to know that our suffering isn't arbitrary, that our joys are not flukes. Our culture's answer: manufacture meaning synthetically, in brands, in hashtags, in curated identities. Be productive, be unique, be visible. But none of it satisfies the hunger for something true, something enduring, because meaning is not something you can purchase or post. It emerges from a confrontation with life's darkest places, from suffering, sacrifice, and reflection, from the willingness to look into the void and not flinch. And yet everything around you trains you to flinch, to look away, to anesthetize. There is a reason Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, imagined a society not oppressed by tyranny, but numbed by pleasure. In his dystopia, meaning was eliminated by giving people endless satisfaction. No suffering, no longing, no questions. Just soma pills, sex, and entertainment. It was a warning not about control, but about forgetting how to need meaning at all. We are closer to that world than we like to admit. Ask yourself, when did you last feel something that wasn't filtered through a screen or softened by irony? When did you last confront a question that made your stomach turn because it mattered? You see, the crisis of meaning is not just about not knowing what life is for. It's about being surrounded by a culture that makes that question seem unnecessary, or worse, uncool. And the result? We become ghosts in our own lives. We move through the motions. We laugh, we cry, we dream, but something essential remains untouched, unawakened. Here's the terrifying twist. You may be living in a world that no longer believes in the soul, but your soul still believes in you. It still cries out in the language of archetypes and symbols and sacrifice. It still longs for purpose, not pleasure, meaning, not mimicry. But to hear that cry, you must first recognize the psychic cage you've been placed in, a cage not made of bars, but of cultural amnesia. You're not broken for feeling this way. You're awake. You're experiencing what the ancients called the dark night of the soul, and what modernity labels depression or burnout. But beneath those diagnoses may lie something deeper, a confrontation with the hollowness of borrowed values, a rejection of synthetic purpose. You are not lost. You are simply at the threshold of a deeper quest. But be warned, the journey ahead does not promise comfort. It demands that you challenge every assumption you've been taught about success, identity, and reality itself. Are you willing to go further? Then step with me into the next layer, where we'll explore the unseen consequences of ignoring this crisis, the invisible ways it shapes your behavior, your relationships, even your perception of time and self. Because what you don't understand still controls you. You've glimpsed the root, the severing of the sacred, the hollow beneath the noise. But what happens when a society, a species, tries to live as if meaning were optional? What happens to the human mind, to the body politic, when depth is replaced by dopamine, when identity is curated but not earned? The consequences are not always loud. They are not bombs or revolutions. They are quiet erosions, subtle enough to seem normal, and that is what makes them so dangerous. It begins in your perception of time. Not long ago, time was cyclical. Farmers followed seasons. Rituals followed moons. Life had rhythms. There was repetition, but within it, meaning. The harvest came. The winter taught. The spring renewed. Time was not a line. It was a dance. Now, time is a countdown. Every moment reduced to a transaction, a to-do, a metric of productivity. You check your phone, your calendar, your watch, not to mark sacred moments, but to measure output. You are no longer a being, you are a brand. Time isn't lived, it's optimized. You start to believe that stillness is laziness, that silence is failure, that you are only as valuable as your last achievement. And in that mental calculus, the soul disappears. But it doesn't stop there. When meaning erodes, so does relationship, not just with others, but with yourself. You begin to treat your emotions as malfunctions. If you're sad, you reach for a fix. Caffeine, scrolling, noise. If you're bored, you assume something is wrong with you, not the culture that made constant stimulation the norm. Your inner world becomes foreign territory, and then you begin to disintegrate, not in a dramatic cinematic way. You don't collapse in a dramatic existential spiral. You just begin to fragment. You perform one self at work, another on social media, another with friends, another in your own mind. Each version trimmed and polished to meet different expectations. At some point, you forget which one is the real you. Or worse, you suspect none of them are. This fragmentation isn't personal failure. It's adaptive behavior in a culture that rewards masks and punishes depth. We don't live in a world that encourages integration of self. We live in one that prizes versatility over authenticity. The psychological toll is enormous. According to Carl Jung, the failure to reconcile your inner and outer selves, what he called the persona and the shadow, leads to neurosis, alienation, even psychosis. You become estranged from your own being. You may succeed publicly and die privately. And still, deeper down, there's a price we almost never name: the collapse of a coherent identity. Think about it. In the past, your identity might come from a lineage, a faith, a shared mythology. You were a son, a daughter, a craftsperson, a pilgrim, a part of a living chain. Your suffering had context. Your decisions had weight. Now, you are told you can be whoever you want, as if selfhood were an outfit, endlessly exchangeable. As if you could design a meaningful identity without friction, contradiction, or roots. But here's what no one tells you. Freedom without foundation is not liberation, it's vertigo. It's standing at the edge of infinite options and realizing that none of them tell you who you are. In this chaos, you default to borrowed identities. You adopt belief systems like fashion trends. You absorb language, values, aesthetics from subcultures you don't understand. You express opinions before you've had time to truly think them, not because you're shallow, but because you're starving for coherence. And what feeds this starvation? A culture that prizes speed over depth. You are bombarded with headlines, hot takes, and instant opinions. But what you rarely receive is silence, reflection, space to metabolize the weight of existence, to ask, what do I really believe? Who am I without the noise? We speak of a mental health crisis, a loneliness epidemic, an identity collapse. But seldom do we trace these back to their source, the loss of shared meaning. And make no mistake, loneliness isn't just physical isolation. It's existential exile. You could be surrounded by people, immersed in conversations, and still feel utterly unseen. Why? Because connection without shared meaning is just noise. Real intimacy begins when two people meet in truth, when they say not "what do you do," but "what do you live for?" And if no one knows what they live for anymore, then intimacy dies. Then relationships become transactions, community becomes content, love becomes performance, and still we don't stop. We double down, we chase stimulation, we build digital selves and hope that the algorithm will save us. We tell ourselves that if we can just go viral, just land the dream job, just meet the right person, we'll feel it again. That something, that sacred weight. But the more we chase it externally, the more it recedes, because meaning does not live out there. It does not come from success or approval or aesthetics. It emerges from within. And that emergence begins only when you stop running, only when you let the silence in long enough to listen. But we've been trained to fear the silence. We treat it like a void, forgetting that in the ancient world, silence was sacred. In silence, prophets heard God. In silence, monks found peace. In silence, the soul becomes audible. What would happen if you stopped? Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Would you hear despair? Maybe, but you might also hear something else, something buried, a whisper, a memory, a spark. Because even in this fractured, noisy, cynical world, your longing for meaning is the proof that meaning is possible. And this longing isn't weakness, it's guidance. It's the soul's compass still spinning, still trying to find true north in a world that broke all the maps. So the question is no longer just, why do I feel this way? It's what happens if I keep ignoring it. If you continue down this path of surface living, of performance over presence, of distraction over depth, what becomes of you? What becomes of us? This is the crisis modernity has failed to name. The epidemic of quiet lives lived in the shadow of a lost why. But here at this juncture, another path emerges. Not one handed to you, but one forged. Not a return to old dogmas, but a rebirth of meaning, personal, embodied, radical. To walk that path, you must rebel, not with rage, with awareness. It's time to break free. You feel it now. The tension between the life you've been handed and the life your soul remembers. You are not lost. You are surrounded by illusions, and that is something you can rebel against. Not with fire and banners, but with clarity, with intention, with the defiance of someone who refuses to be quietly erased. Let's be clear, what you're up against isn't just a bad habit or a flawed system. It's a philosophical machine designed, often unconsciously, to grind down your hunger for truth and replace it with productivity, novelty, and compliance. It is not interested in your depth. It cannot profit from your wholeness. So your rebellion begins in the most radical place of all, your own mind. But how? Not by adopting a new identity, not by switching from one ideology to another like trading masks at a masquerade. This is not about adding, this is about unlearning. You were born with meaning, you were meaning. A child doesn't ask, what's the point of play? A child plays because play is sacred. A child doesn't ask, why look at the stars? The stars call and the child answers. Then we grow up, and we're taught to replace wonder with certainty. Rebellion means remembering, but to remember, you must first stop performing. This is the first act of revolution, radical honesty. Ask yourself now, without filters, without fear, what are you pretending to care about? Who are you trying to impress? What parts of your life feel like someone else's script? The truth may sting, but it will also set you ablaze. Because the moment you admit what no longer fits, what no longer feeds you, you make space for the real, for the raw, for the unscripted, and what follows that honesty, stillness. Stillness is not passivity. It is resistance in its purest form. To sit without scrolling, without broadcasting, without numbing, and simply be is to declare, I will not outsource my consciousness. This is where the second act of rebellion begins. Turn inward, not in a narcissistic spiral, but in a sacred excavation. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are beneath the roles, masks, and projections. It's not always beautiful. It often begins with shadows. You will meet your rage, your envy, your fear. You will discover that part of your suffering came not from the world, but from the smallness you agreed to wear in order to be accepted by it. But here's the paradox. When you face your darkness, you reclaim your light. Not the superficial light of feel-good affirmations, but the fierce glow of self-knowledge. And as that inner fire grows, you begin to feel it, autonomy. You're no longer shaped by algorithms. You stop chasing validation and begin embodying value. You don't need to find meaning. You begin to generate it. And how do you generate meaning? You suffer consciously. You love fully. You act intentionally. Let's break that down. 1. Suffer consciously. This may sound brutal, but it's the cornerstone of all authentic meaning. We have been conditioned to view suffering as a glitch, something to be avoided, medicated, ignored. But Viktor Frankl, who watched people perish in concentration camps, knew differently. Suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds a meaning. This doesn't mean we seek pain, it means we listen to it. We ask, what is this pain pointing to? What illusion is it destroying? What truth is it birthing? To suffer consciously is to allow life to sculpt you into something wiser, deeper, more whole. Every scar, a symbol. Every breakdown, a gateway. 2. Love fully. In a meaningless world, love becomes performance. Swipe right, double tap, post cute captions. But real love, the kind that transforms, requires presence, vulnerability, sacrifice. It means showing up when it's inconvenient. It means letting people truly see you, even the broken, scared, unfinished parts. It means loving not to complete yourself, but to expand yourself. Because every time you love authentically, you defy the lie that we are alone, separate, disposable. Love is the most ancient rebellion. It's the thread that binds the cosmos, and every act of real love weaves meaning into the fabric of your life. 3. Act intentionally. The world will try to tell you what to want. It will whisper that meaning lies in likes, upgrades, prestige. But intention is your sword. With it, you cut through the noise. To act intentionally is to live aligned, not perfectly, but consciously. You wake up and ask, what matters to me today? Not what sells, not what trends. You choose your words, your work, your relationships like an artist choosing colors. You don't fill your calendar, you fill your life. And slowly, a miracle begins to occur. You feel it. Your days no longer blur into each other. You begin to recognize yourself again, not the persona, but the presence. time softens. Silence becomes friend, not foe. You're not chasing life, you're participating in it. This is what it means to break free. It doesn't look dramatic, it looks awake, grounded, real. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop floating and start rooting. You stop surviving and start meaning. But here's the final truth of rebellion. You cannot do it alone, not fully, because meaning, while personal, is also relational. It multiplies when shared. It deepens when echoed. So once you begin to wake up, once you begin to taste the raw beauty of an intentional life, your next act is to light torches for others. Share your truth, not to convert, but to connect. Build spaces online, in person, within art, within conversation, where meaning is welcome again. Listen to others not for data, but for soul. Make rituals out of the mundane. Tell stories that heal. Ask questions that hurt beautifully. Be the reminder in someone else's darkness that they are not alone. Because this rebellion, it's not a lonely one, it's a quiet revolution of awakening hearts. And it is already underway. Now something stirs, not just resistance, but revelation. And from the smoldering edges of your old beliefs, your former identities, your discarded scripts, something new is forming, a vision, a truth so powerful it doesn't just challenge the world, it rebuilds it, ready to see it. Then step into the final chapter, the ultimate realization. Let's return to the silence, the one you avoided, the one you filled with noise, ambition, endless motion. Return there now, not to run, but to listen. Close your eyes, not in sleep, but in seeing. What do you find? Not answers, not slogans, but a pulse, a hum, a breath that is not yours, yet has always been yours. And in that moment, in that stillness that is deeper than any philosophy or psychology can touch, you realize something that changes everything. The world was never meaningless. It was you who had forgotten how to see. Meaning isn't something out there to be found like buried treasure. It isn't a secret code in the universe waiting for the right book or guru to unlock. It's not manufactured, it's not earned, it's not given by others. Meaning is what you are, not the personality you perform, not the resume or reputation, but the presence behind your thoughts, the one that watches, that aches, that loves, that wonders. That part of you was never lost. It was simply buried beneath false quests for success, for approval, for security. You weren't searching for meaning, you were searching for permission to be what you already are. And here is the final paradox. The most powerful meaning arises not from asking, "What does it all mean?" but from daring to say, "I am willing to live as if it matters." That's it. That is the gateway. To live as if it matters, even when you don't have proof. To speak with truth, even when the world rewards performance. To create beauty, even when no one sees it. To forgive, even when it hurts. To love, even when it would be easier to harden. This is not blind optimism. This is sacred defiance. To live as if it matters is the greatest act of faith. Not faith in gods or doctrines or destiny, but faith in being itself. You don't need to understand the entire cosmos to live meaningfully. You only need to trust that your existence, your breath, your sorrow, your longing is enough. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But he left something unsaid. Sometimes you don't find your why first. Sometimes you choose to live as if there is one, and in doing so, you call it into being. The world begins to glow when you stop demanding that it prove itself. Meaning emerges the moment you offer yourself fully to the moment, to the conversation, to the art, to the silence. That's why ancient mystics and modern physicists, those speaking different languages, often arrive at the same stunned truth. Everything is connected. The breath you take ripples across the cosmos. The kindness you give echoes through time. The despair you survive becomes a light post for someone else. Nothing is wasted, nothing is separate. And when you begin to live from that place, from the knowing that meaning is not a destination but a mode of being, you stop trying to fix your life and start inhabiting it fully. And something strange happens. Colors seem richer, time slows, you listen more, you resist less, you begin to laugh. Not the laugh of distraction, but the laugh of someone who has remembered that existence itself is absurdly beautiful. The grief doesn't vanish, but it softens. The ache doesn't go away, but it begins to guide you. You stop asking, what is the meaning of life? And you begin to ask, how can I mean something now? You realize that meaning isn't in the answers. It's in the engagement, in how you show up to the mystery, in how you face the unanswerable with wonder instead of cynicism, in how you continue to choose presence over numbness, love over performance, truth over comfort. And then maybe for the first time, you are no longer afraid, not because you have control, but because you no longer need it. You walk barefoot into the absurd. You speak honestly into the void. And the miracle is this: the void listens, not with words, but with the gentle unfurling of your own soul. The truth is not outside you. It is not in another book, another trend, another algorithm. The truth is this: you are the meaning you seek. You are the artist and the canvas, the question and the answer, the ache and the healing. You always were. And so now the question is no longer, how do I find meaning in a meaningless world? It is, how do I live so that my very being becomes a source of meaning for others? The world doesn't need more searchers. It needs livers, makers, beings. It needs people willing to live with reverence in an age of irony, to write poetry in spreadsheets, to hold eye contact when it's easier to scroll, to speak sacred truths in secular spaces, to build cathedrals out of conversations, to walk through the world like it matters, because it does, not because it promised you something, but because you chose to respond with meaning. You, alone in the dark, chose to light a candle rather than curse the night. And that is how a meaningless world becomes sacred again, not by proof, but by presence, not by explanation, but by embodiment. So go. Live your ordinary day like it's an epic. Do the dishes with devotion. Write emails with soul. Sit in traffic with breath. Create rituals in your routines. Infuse meaning into the mundane. Because if life is meaningless, then you are free to create meaning everywhere. That is the final realization, not the discovery of meaning, but the becoming of it, not the question, but the answer you choose to live.